Hey there. You're the first here.
Hey.
Just as if we were at,
Yeah, there you go.
we would have been the first again.
I would like to dedicate this tonight to Dina. She was a great lady.
For sure. For sure. How old was she?
I think she was about my dad's age, so she was probably about 93, 94.
I have a funeral tomorrow for somebody who died of COVID who was 88.
She had dementia, but she was a neat lady.
So did
Did you have a funeral this morning?
This woman did too.
Really? That's just too bad.
Yeah. Yeah. She also had kidney cancer and a few other things. So
Were you at a funeral this morning?
I did. How'd you know?
'Cause I saw you. I was at my doctor's office. I saw you walking. It's like that's Mark's walk. Eden?
Yeah.
Yeah, about 10:30 or so, 10:30.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was you then. You must have just got out of your car.
That's crazy.
So I was going right on the freeway, and I said, "Oh, that looks like Rabbi."
You saw me from the freeway?
No, I was on Sepulveda.
Whatever. That's still pretty. Oh, I mean, getting on the freeway there.
Yeah.
Well, is everything okay?
Yeah, I have a halter monitor for a couple days.
Mm-hmm.
Can't do that videoly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, at least you had human contact.
Yeah, first time in weeks.
Yeah, we the only place I've been is the cemetery. People
Bingo.
are,
Don't forget bingo.
Have you been wearing the new mask?
I have been. I wore it today. Interestingly, I took it off because
Hi,
the family wanted me to take it off, and I was standing I was definitely more than 6 feet away, so I took it off. But I was wearing I have a cool mask that Kelly brought to me that looks really nice. I definitely wear it it goes with my suit. Trey, can you show my deluxe mask that I have?
Yeah, I like that color. Philip has one too.
Yeah, it's nice. It goes with my suit, my kind of blue, navy blue suit. So it's my.
And I like the clip on the nose because I can put it down lower and it doesn't fog up my glasses.
It is a deluxe mask. I hope I never have to wear it again. No, but I will. I'm going to wear it tomorrow. I have another funeral tomorrow. We were just saying I have another funeral for a COVID related thing.
I have one like that too, Tracy. I also got a cream color one too. Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah.
This is our deluxe masks. These are deluxe. So it has a little nose thing there. So it's my fancy mask.
Talk about bingo.
Tracy wants to do a commercial.
I'm gonna do a commercial before you start studying for bingo. Bingo is this Sunday. We have lots of prizes. We've already got, I think, 10 to 15 people purchase 3 cards or more, and it lasts the whole month. So come play bingo with us. The rabbi will be calling.
No, I'm not. I don't agree with this gambling business. What is this gambling? What is this gambling? Bye. That lack of spirituality in gambling. How could that happen?
That's why you don't play poker, right, Rabbi?
Poker, don't never go to Vegas. I hate that place. I watched Hangover last night just to see Vegas, actually. That was the closest I could come. So I watched Hangover last night.
We usually go there for the concerts. In fact, we're supposed to go in November to see John Fogerty.
Oh, wow.
The win.
Too bad we won't be here.
Beginning of November with my sister and brother-in-law coming too.
Blanca.
We went to see some shows.
At the win? Is Fogerty playing at the win again?
Yeah. And we're staying at a condo down a ways away. I have a cousin. My cousin, Dina's daughter-in-law. My cousin lives down over there.
Hi, Mark.
I what big thumbs.
Well, we were supposed to go and we were supposed to be there 2 weeks from today for Tracy's birthday. We were going to see Lady Gaga at the Park MGM, and that got
lucky you.
That got postponed or no, not
She's
postponed.
great.
Just canceled, done. So yeah, Tracy was looking forward to that. So we'll figure out some other way. It is literally her birthday 2 weeks from, well, Monday, the 11th. But we were supposed to be there the 13th. I'm looking at it, it's still on my calendar. Anyways, look, all of us have stuff that we are not going to be able to do, birthdays, events that are going to be not the same. But as Mike and I were talking about, unfortunately, we also had some losses in the last few days. I definitely, and I talked to I was at Eden Cemetery today, and I have another funeral there tomorrow. We're definitely seeing an uptick in actual deaths. And in our cases, the ones that Mike and I were sharing, the individuals were all elderly. They were all had other severe complicating factors, but it is definitely, I didn't have this 3 weeks ago. Even when they had first enacted rules like masks and things like that, I had some funerals, but they were not for people who had died of corona. But now it's definitely hitting it's now causing death. So
Don't say how old.
no, I told you yesterday when I was on the call, the person who passed was 88. So, and yes, you're right, Phyllis, that is too young. And she was a pretty vibrant lady until about a year ago. And then she was diagnosed with kidney cancer and some other stuff. But anyways, on a happier note, hopefully, and we're just a couple of people are still jumping on. I know some people aren't going to be able to be here tonight. They already expressed their regrets for not being able to join us. Hopefully you were able to join us last night on our Israel.
That was wonderful, Rabbi. That was just wonderful.
Thanks. Yeah, it really came together almost perfectly. I was definitely worried about it. I shut down every other internet device, everything that could possibly have messed up the internet, and everybody was not allowed to go watch TV, and everyone, 2 other people were not allowed to use cable or internet at all to make sure that we didn't lose the signal. I had a very, very bad fear that something would go wrong technically, and it didn't, because it was all basically being held together by this computer that I'm shaking right now, my laptop computer that had, I just, dozens of people, the speaker.
It was excellent. Yeah.
And it was really, by the way, one of the highlights for me, and kind of obviously is, if you saw it, the most difficult and most powerful thing for me was to have Jake Steinberg on talking about his brother, Max.
Well, that was so moving, and Rabbi. That was so moving.
It came up with that idea literally, I called him at 6:09 and said, I know it's last minute, but because they're friends, but I always wanted to bring them out here, and it's just, they're always so busy doing, they're doing a lot of fundraising and speaking on behalf of Israel and behalf of soldiers. And so Yom HaAtzmaut is always so busy for them those days that there's no way to get them to come out. So it was, again, another example of, because everyone's locked in, that they were able to, Jake was able to come. And I thought about having his father and mother speak, but Jake is a really good speaker. He's Max's younger brother. He's 2 years younger. What I didn't talk about on the during the event last night was that he's 2 years younger. So he was 13 when they had the bar mitzvah. Max was 15, and Max had never Max had waited to have his bar mitzvah. I mean, they were close in age, and I think the parents kind of wanted to save a little money by having a party together and those kind of things. But Max was also not really, really into having his bar mitzvah at all. And so when he talked, and he did kind of hint at that a little bit, but this was not a family that was that religiously connected. That you heard his parents had never been to Israel until, unfortunately, they had to bury their son. And this was the least likely young man to do what he ended up doing. I literally, you could make a movie of it and people would not, they'd think you were not telling the truth, basically, because this was the least likely kid to become a hero. And when I heard that he had died in Gaza, I mean, part of me, it just didn't seem like it could be the same person. And yeah, it's a crazy story, and it's weird to kind of be peripherally part of it like that. But he's to some extent become an American Jewish hero, Max. Anyways, it's a true story that, again, almost is beyond. If you told me Jake, the younger brother, would have done that, I would have said had moved to Israel and become a soldier and done those kind of things, I would have said absolutely, I could see that, but not Max. And so it was it was kind of wild. The whole thing was seemed like a nightmare when it happened, and still seems surreal. So anyways, we'll as Mike said, we're going to dedicate tonight's study to his, not by blood a member of his family, but somebody who was very close to Dina Kehan, right?
Yes.
And we'll also think about Max Steinberg tonight on in the waning hours of Yom Ha'atzmaut and thinking about Israel, people who have also sacrificed and given up their lives for Israel. So that is an appropriate way to kind of begin with tonight's class, which actually is, we're reading a Torah portion called, Mike, what's the name of the portion?
After death, is that what it's?
Yeah, Achrei
in
Mot.
English. Yeah.
Achrei Mot, after death. So how can you come up with you almost can't, you can't almost have a better segue into that topic than this. And so what we do is actually we kind of skip back in time a couple weeks to Shmini, when we read about the death of Nadav and Avihu. And so part of this portion is going to be that follow-up scene. And so after the death here refers to a specific death, to Nadav and Avihu's death. And so we'll take a look at the portion and excuse me.
My bar mitzvah portion.
Right. It's
A couple years ago.
It's the portion that you were able to read, and we're not going to make you chant it tonight.
Thank you.
People are still popping in, and we're going to get going. This is a portion that we read every year, not just during the weekly portion, right?
I held it, Yom Kippur.
Exactly. So some of this portion will hopefully sound familiar because we read it, 6 months ago. So it's not like it was just fresh in your mind, but it is memorable because we do read it on perhaps the one day that everybody comes to services. So this might be the most well-known portion besides the big portions. And by the big portions, I mean like the plagues, the leaving Egypt, the Mount Sinai scene, many scenes in Genesis. But for a scene in Leviticus, or not a scene really, for a Torah portion in Leviticus that's more about laws, this is the most probably heard. I don't know, again, if people are paying attention, if they're dozing out during this. I hope they don't, because obviously there's a reason we read this at Yom Kippur. It's about how to purify and how to get the Mishkan, the tabernacle, ready again for people. And later on, the same kind of rituals would be done for the Beit HaMikdash, for the temple in Jerusalem. So this is how you fix when something has gone horribly wrong, a situation that that we're going to take a look at and discuss. This is the part of Leviticus we spoke about for people who were a couple weeks ago, and again for those who were not. The first part of Leviticus are the sacrifices that are offered in the dedication and the kind of the run up to the temple. And again, some of those sacrifices are done regularly, not just the one time that the temple was dedicated or the Mishkan was dedicated. But the first part is that, and then we have Shmini, where we have this scene of death and Nadav and Avihu being burnt up and then they're killed by God. And the rest of Leviticus is really now how to fix the situation, which is this portion, and then even in this portion, how to keep it that way, how to not go backwards, how to keep holy. And that's really kind of the first part of Leviticus is what to do to be holy, especially for the priests. And then the rest of Leviticus is pretty much how to stay that way and how to fix it when you're not holy. So Tazria and Matzorah, last week we were about physical illnesses and ailments and physical situations, we would say, including menstruation and childbearing and different types of illnesses that people would go through a spiritual cleansing to kind of get right and to get back into the community. This is now kind of along those lines, how to fix this situation, and we'll take a look at it right now. So again, I'm still, people might still jump in and I have to let them in, but and by the way, another thing I want to tell you about last night, I was really worried about, in case we had people that if any time we were going to get Zoom bombed, it was going to be last night with the Consul General from Israel. And so we were really concerned about security. So in addition to running the videos and interviewing the guests, I was really also trying to keep an eye out on suspicious activities, if you will. So it was wonderful to have everybody there. It was it was very meaningful to do it, but it was really, really draining. So when it was done, I was tired on one hand, I was exhausted, but I was still wired, and I did not have a great sleep last night because it was so emotional. And again, I'm really glad I could do it, but I was really worried about security. So I'm not all, if it ever happens here, we know that it could happen that somebody gets in and, I didn't look and see who was coming in because we're in the middle of studying something, but it is something that I do have to keep an eye on and be alert to, because I know I've had friends, we've had other rabbis and people in the Jewish community that have run Zoom meetings that have had this. This is a real issue. So, and we have a password, but the password's everywhere. So anyways, just that's a little pre-warning for anybody who's here that thank God we haven't had that, and I hope it doesn't happen. But if it happens, just understand that in the midst of everything else, having to look at security is who's coming in is part of my job too. So that being said, thank God it wouldn't be disastrous if somebody did come in here as opposed to a synagogue. 2 days ago, by the way, we also marked, and we should also say that we can remember Lori Kay for her death and martyrdom, and simply being in a synagogue in Poway on the 27th. It's hard to believe that was only a year ago, folks, but that was her first yard site on Monday. So we remember her too tonight and study in her honor. She took Jewish learning very seriously too. So let's take a look. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe Achrei mot. Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron, who died when they drew too close to the presence of the Lord. So it says after the death. We'd assume that it was not necessarily the next day. It was two portions, or actually, again, a couple of weeks ago that we read it. Could be if the portions weren't doubled up, it could have been 3 weeks ago. but we read it 2 weeks ago, and so you have to kind of you have to go back. You have to be reminded that this is what it is. So from those words, the fifth and sixth word, if you will, Achrei mot, we get our portions title, after the death. That's what Achrei mot means. Lord said to Moses, and this is where the specific laws come into effect. Tell your brother Aaron that he is not to come at will into the shrine behind the curtain, in front of the cover that is upon the ark, lest he die, for I appear in the cloud over the cover.
Mark, a quick question, if I may.
Yep.
What did the sons do that drew too close to the presence of the Lord?
Okay, so Al, if you weren't here a couple weeks ago, and it is important, I was saying kind of the very beginning, in Parshat Shmini, we read about how Nadav and Avihu offer up a strange fire, a strange illegal or unlawful or uncommanded, at the very best, sacrifice or offering of incense, and God strikes them down. Actually, since we have it right in front of us, give me 1 second. I'll turn back to the line in Leviticus where we actually read it, because as you remember, if you recall, folks, a couple weeks ago, it's a very short story, and it's about the only narrative in the book of Leviticus. So when we talk about the story, it is very, very, very quick. So here's the story.
Sorry, Mark.
No, it's fine. It's right here. Chapter 10, it's 3 verses, so actually it happens in 1 verse, but Nadav and Avihu each took a fire pan, put fire in it, and laid incense upon it. And they offered before the Lord alien fire, which God, had not enjoined upon them. And fire came forth from the Lord and consumed them. Thus they died at the instance of the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, this is what the Lord meant when he said, through those near to me, I show myself holy and gain glory before all the people. And Aaron was silent. And the postscript here, Moses called Mishael and Elzaphan, sons of Uziel, the uncle of Aaron. So these are cousins. These are a fancy way of saying cousin, which we don't have a word for that in Hebrew. These are Nadav and Avihu's cousins. Aaron's cousins, and said to them, come forward and carry your kinsmen away from the front of the sanctuary to a place outside the camp. They came forward and carried them out of the camp by their tunics as Moses had ordered. And Moses said to Aaron and his sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, the 2 brothers of Nadav and Avihu, do not bare your heads and do not rend your clothes, lest you die and anger strike the whole community. But your kinsmen, all the house of Israel, shall bewail the burning that the Lord has wrought. And so do not go outside the tent of meeting, lest you die, for the Lord's anointing oil is upon you. And then the next words are, and the Lord spoke to Aaron, saying, drink no wine or other intoxicant, you or your sons, when you enter the tent of meeting. So again, we get from that maybe they were drinking before they went in. We don't know, but that's the whole, there's nothing more about their death for the next 6 chapters. So we go through Tazria and Metzorah, the double portion we read last week. And then when we come to this week's portion, it flips back to that narrative and now quotes the law after this. So let us look at almost there, back there. So thank you, Hal, for having, again, especially for people who were not there. So now we have a follow-up law, which is that Nadav and Avihu are now, their remains are gone. And again, we are not sure whether they burned from the inside or from the outside, but regardless, now they have to fix the situation. But first, Aaron gets another warning, which seems remarkably like the previous warnings that happened in Shemini. And this one is specifically that you are not allowed to, Aaron is not allowed to come into the shrine behind the curtain, in front of the cover that is upon the ark, lest he die. For I appear in the cloud over the cover. So I'm gonna explain that, though I don't know that it needs a lot of explanation. Aaron cannot go into the Holy of Holies. Aaron cannot go into the place where God is normally. And there is a place where God is normally, which is over the ark. Over the Ark of the Covenant rests the presence of God. So this is the, I'm looking at it, reading through it in Hebrew. Does anybody have any questions or comments about that? This is a pretty strict and definitive statement about where Aaron is allowed to go. And even Aaron isn't allowed into the Holy of Holies.
Okay, I think that he gave it twice because Aaron had to be in utter shock and probably didn't hear it the first time, and he knew that.
Trying to get my iPads. I'm trying.
Okay.
I'm getting it set up.
We hear you, Philip. You're there. Here, I'm going to mute it for just until you're ready. It says, well, clearly in the Torah, it says that Aaron is not supposed to put himself into a situation where he can also die like his sons. I mean, it says specifically, the Lord spoke to Moses, who died when they drew too close to the presence of the Lord. It doesn't exactly say that that's what they did, right? It says they offered up alien fire, but here there seems to be this understanding that what they did was they were not just offering up alien fire, but it's where they did it and the way or maybe the means of how they did it, which brought them too close into proximity to God. So there's this understanding that there are places that are so holy that you're not really supposed to be there, which we know already. It's something that Moses has told a few times, especially at Mount Sinai, which again is another one of those places where God's presence was. So however God exists in this world in a physical presence, that is the place that you and I have to be careful of when we're there, which we also see when Moses was on Mount Sinai in the first time at the burning bush, when God says the place you're standing on is holy. So there seems to be, at least from Moses's time on, an understanding that there are places that are so holy that you're not supposed to go there. And if you go there, or if you're there, you got to be really careful. So what do we call this presence of God? Does anybody know?
Kina.
That's one of the names we use for it. One of the other words we use is we call it the presence of God. The word Shekhinah is not used here, but the other word that's used there is the kavod, which sounds remarkably like COVID, but it is the kavod of God. It is the presence, the honor of God.
The glory.
What? The glory. So it's usually translated as the glory or the presence, but this word kavod means honor or holiness. It also seems to be connected to the liver, part of the body that detoxifies us and is considered very heavy. But there's a sense of heaviness to this, that there's a sense of weightiness to something that maybe shouldn't have weight. So that's one of the reasons. I mean, we speculate why is the word kavod used? I mean, it means honor, but it also seems to have this connection to weightiness too. So, and we would say that something has weight, that it is this is a weighty, something that's weighty means it's something that's heavy, that's got some kind of reverence to it. So in Hebrew, the word kavod can mean honor, respect, reverence, importance, but also weight. The Hebrew word kavod is actually the Hebrew word. The word itself, the root, means weight. So it seems as though that this is one of the words, and sometimes the word that is used to describe what it looked like is an anan, which is usually as a cloud. So it's almost like, well, we're not really sure whether the cloud is the presence or whether the cloud covers the presence so that you and I don't see that, so that the cloud obscures what's inside it, which is the actual entity of what God looks, or God, how God manifests. I won't say looks like, because we can't look at it, but that the cloud shrouds the presence of God. Because look what happens. The Lord said to Moses, tell your brother Aaron, he's not to come at will into the shrine behind the curtain in front of the cover that is upon the ark, lest he die. For I appear in the cloud over the cover. So this is a direction of protection, so that Aaron doesn't come too close to the presence of God. Thus, and then it continues, thus only shall Aaron enter the shrine with a bull of the herd for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering, kind of going back to the offerings that we read about in the first two portions in Vayikra and Sav. He shall be dressed in a sacral linen tunic with linen breeches next to his flesh, and be girt with a linen sash, and he shall wear a linen turban. They are sacral vestments. He shall bathe his body in water and then put them on. So the description of the breeches and the way that he appears is one that definitely has a sense of purity. He's washed, he's bathed, and he's also wrapped in these robes and in these breeches and these underwear, even, by the way, which that's what breeches are. They're underwear. So that he's and which, by the way, implies that people didn't always necessarily wear breeches, by the way. But when Aaron is serving as a priest, he's definitely wearing breeches. And these are, as you can see, these are very, they would have been very expensive and very difficult to clean, just like linen is today. But they're obviously kind of the nicest types of garments that people could have had. And even in the wilderness, they had to do this. And it says, from the Israelite community, you shall take 2 he-goats for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. And now this is the part that people start to, when they start hearing this, this is where they start thinking about Yom Kippur. Because again, even though this whole portion's read, or sometimes depending on the synagogue, the whole portion's read, this is where people start thinking, oh, this is why we read it at Yom Kippur. Now, you could say that it's because this is the way that the temple would be purified. Once the temple was built in Jerusalem, this is the way the temple was purified every year at Yom Kippur. But there's also this sense that when we read this, we read it coming right after this horrible incident where Aaron's own sons are killed for a mistake that they make. And so even though we don't talk about it a lot at Yom Kippur, probably because it's so tough for our modern sensibilities that God would destroy somebody, that, you know, this smoting God of smiting, God smoting, I don't know, something like that. But he's doing God's smoting people. So almighty smiter. This is tough, and we don't usually talk too much about it at Yom Kippur, because it really is, you know, what's the ultimate punishment for a sin. And again, a sin that is a ritual sin, that Aaron's sons were killed because of their coming in the wrong way, doing the wrong sacrifice. This is tough to be reminded of at Yom Kippur. So we usually focus on this part, which is the cleansing, the ritual of purification. So what does it happen? What happens? He takes the goats for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering, 2 he-goats. We're going to get to that later, of course, for those who remember this portion and love this portion for its crazy goat stuff. Aaron is to offer his own bowl of sin offering and make expiation for himself and for his household. So he's got to do first his own cleansing. He has to do sacrifices on behalf of himself and the other priests. Aaron shall take 2 he-goats and let them stand before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And here it is. He shall place the 2 goats, one marked for the Lord and the other for Azazel. And this is where, if you're Yom Kippur, remembering and flashbacks to Yom Kippur readings in the past, this is when we get to Azazel. And this is the first mention of Azazel. It's going to be mentioned a few times coming up. We don't know what Azazel is. We don't. That's the least problematic answer, but you know that that's not the only answer. Correct?
You're the rabbi.
Well, you tell me, because you're very learned. You're a very learned man. What else could this possibly be?
I think it translates as a hard surface. That's what I read in the commentaries in the Art Scroll.
Yeah, you read it in an Orthodox. You read it in an Orthodox commentary that doesn't want to deal with the other possibilities.
What can I say?
Yeah, well, you know what it also means. The problem is Azazel seems to be a name.
Well, the devil, I guess.
Yeah. So this is the problem, that one of these goats is oftentimes nowadays, we don't translate it. Like this, we don't translate it. So in some translations, they would simply say the scapegoat. So Azazel became a scapegoat without ever explaining it and just kind of taking it to the next step, which is, oh, it's a scapegoat. Well, we never had the word scapegoat until we had an Azazel ritual. So this is the problem that, we don't know that this is a demon. We don't know that this is, we don't know. I mean, we really don't. But the point is that we do have texts which talk about Azazel in later traditions during the Greco-Roman period, where Azazel is a fallen angel. And specifically, one of the fallen angels who came to earth to marry women and to kind of become the ancestor of the race of giants that lived here on the planet. There's a Denzel Washington movie called Fallen, which is all about, the possibility of this being a demon. But we don't know. And again, it could be that when did that movie come out? It came out in 1998. That movie's 22 years old. It didn't do very well. Not unusual for a Denzel Washington movie, especially in 1998. But the possibility that, again, there's something magical, mystical going on here, we don't know. And again, as we get further into Jewish tradition, the more, even not even modern, but even in the ancient world, people didn't want to go down that road. That what we have here is some kind of remnant of a fairly pagan type ritual, which we know that was still being done in the Roman world, and in a lot of kind of societies were still doing sacrifices, in some cases human sacrifices, where one sacrifice would be spared and one sacrifice would be actually slaughtered. So the possibility that by this ritual that some type of catastrophe would be averted, did it need to include a fallen angel? Did it need to include, something that was even more ritualistic or deeper than what we have? It says, Aaron shall take the 2 goats, let them stand before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and he shall place lots upon the goats, one marked for the Lord and the other marked for Azazel. Aaron shall bring forward the goat designated by lot for the Lord, which he is to offer as a sin offering, while the goat designated by lot for Azazel shall be left standing alive before the Lord to make expiation with it and to send it off to the wilderness for Azazel. Now, again, it could be Azazel is the wilderness, but why say Azazel in the wilderness? So it doesn't, we can't, we're not sure. And so I rather than go down that hole of what Azazel is or who Azazel is, obviously it's been a long time since we've done this ritual, but it does seem to be that the ritual of casting lots and choosing which goat was for which does something very powerful. And I think what's at the heart of it, whatever Azazel is, there's this understanding that by casting lots, God was making the decision. In the end, it was kind of fate or God's decision which goat would go where. And so there is this kind of understanding where it's still in God's hands. So even if Azazel is a dark force, even if there's something here that, again, completely escapes our understanding, there's still this idea that the ritual of casting lots puts this back on God and allows us to have a ritual that either makes us feel like we've gotten rid of our sin, or we're kind of reenacting this idea that all of us, there's an element to fate here that all of us lack some control, and that there's a certain casting of lots on our fate, on our personal situation. So it does
Torah portion.
It does seem to be the lot. Yeah. Sorry. What was that?
I don't think Hal was talking to you.
Oh, okay.
I apologize. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm sorry. I'm very sorry.
No, it's okay. So it says, Aaron shall then offer his bull of sin offering to make expiation for himself and his household. He shall slaughter his bull of sin offering. And he shall take a panful of glowing coals, scoop from the altar before the Lord, 2 handfuls of finely ground aromatic incense, and bring this behind the curtain. You shall put the incense on the fire before the Lord, so that the cloud from the incense screens the cover that is over the ark of the pact, lest he die. You shall take some of the blood of the bull and sprinkle it with his finger over the cover of the east side. In front of the cover, you shall sprinkle some of the blood with his finger 7 times. You shall then slaughter the people's goat of sin offering, bring its blood behind the curtain, and do with the blood as he had done with the blood of the bull. You shall sprinkle it over the cover and in front of the cover. Thus he shall purge the shrine of the uncleanness and transgression of the Israelites, whatever their sins, and he shall do the same for the tent of meeting, which abides with them in the midst of their uncleanness. When he goes in to make expiation in the shrine, nobody else shall be in the tent of meeting until he comes out. When he has made expiation for himself and his household and for the whole congregation of Israel, he shall go out to the altar that is before the Lord and purge it. He shall take some of the blood of the bull and of the goat and apply it to each of the horns of the altar, and the rest of the blood he shall sprinkle with his own finger. He shall sprinkle with his finger 7 times. Thus he shall cleanse it of its uncleanness, the Israelites, and consecrate it. So, all of these rituals of purification that are done at the shrine, at the actual Holy of Holies, at the altar, all of these places that Aaron goes through this sprinkling blood to purify it, all of those areas need to be purified. And what it said specifically is that that is the time when he's allowed to go into the Holy of Holies. That's the only time he's allowed to do it. And that act of blood is going to purify it so that it's good for the whole rest of the year. It's the only time he goes in there is to make that offering and to sprinkle that blood. That's the only time he's allowed to go in there, to sprinkle blood. Otherwise, he's never in there. So clearly, this is a really special ritual. It's one that, again, we repeat, we reenact, or retell, or reimagine, I would say, every year at Yom Kippur, because every year the high priest's job was to go into this one place where only he could go and do this ritual. Back to the goat that was for Azazel. Aaron shall lay both of his hands upon the head of the live goat and confess over it all the iniquities and transgression of the Israelites, whatever their sins, putting them on the head of the goat, and it shall be sent off to the wilderness through a designated man. Thus the goat shall carry on it all the iniquities to an inaccessible region, and the goat shall be set free in the wilderness. Anybody still thinking that this is the same as Azazel? Maybe. Maybe. Any comments on that? Because that is the part of the ritual of cleansing and purifying the community, is by finally sending this out, this goat out. And it says, and Aaron shall go to the tent of meeting, take off all the linen vestments that he had put on when he entered the shrine, and leave them there. He shall bathe his body in water in the holy precinct and put on his vestments. Then he shall come out and offer his burnt offering and the burnt offering of the people, making expiation for himself and his people. So that's what he does. Now that he's cleansed the altar, that he's cleansed the Holy of Holies, now he comes back out and takes care of the rest of the people. It says, even the person who set free the Azazel goat shall wash his clothes and bathe his body, and then he can come back to the camp. I'm going to continue, kind of skip forward a little bit. And he who burns shall wash his clothes and bathe his body. And this is where we get to this point right here. Why do we read this at Yom Kippur? And this shall be done. This shall be to you a law for all time. In the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you shall practice self-denial, and you shall do no manner of work, neither the citizen or the alien who resides among you. For on this day of atonement shall be made for you to cleanse you of all your sins, and you shall be clean before the Lord. It shall be a Sabbath of complete rest for you, and you shall practice self-denial. It is a law for all time. So this is the line that we usually finish with when we do the Torah reading. This is the explanation for why, again, we read this at Yom Kippur, because this was done then every year at Yom Kippur. A day of fasting, a day of Shabbat. It doesn't say specifically fasting, it says self-denial, which the rabbis interpreted included fasting, not drinking. It's important to remember that the Muslims are in the period of Ramadan right now, which is makes our fast look like a breeze. I would not like to be fasting now, though. You can make the argument it's easier to fast when you're confined to your home, but it's still maybe it's more tempting when you're in a house with your kitchen all the time. I don't know. People I know who are fasting right now for Ramadan are telling me that it's harder, but I don't know if that's just because, again, they're being confronted with food like all of us right now. It's more accessible. But this is Yom Kippur.
Their fast just from sunrise to sunset?
Yes, but it's for 30 days.
And the day's the longest time of the year.
That's not one day. If you had to do it one day, we'd go, yeah, that's an easy fast. That's a 12-hour fast. We can do that in our sleep. But try doing that for 30 days. It makes Yom Kippur and Passover together look pretty easy. And again, if you're living in an area where the sun is out for 17, 18 hours a day, it makes it really, really hard. So
What makes
not easy.
When it's in
This
the
time of
fall,
year, when it's in September, remember, it retrograde. It goes back 11 days every year. They're on a purely lunar calendar. So right now,
Mark,
not so bad. Yeah.
Mark, traditionally they have a big feast to break the fast, and it's very communal experience. And this shelter in place puts a big damper on that.
Yeah, that's true too.
It's like they're having a Seder for 30 nights, and they have to do it alone.
Yeah, and that does make it hard. But I will tell you too that the first day and last day are also, especially the last day, is oftentimes a really big party, Eid, and that's going to be probably again still under quarantine. So yes, it is hard when you're doing that. But again, it was hard for us at Passover too. Yeah.
Mark, in their prayers are some equivalent to a minion?
They don't require. There are prayers that they do say only when they have a quorum, a group of people. But it's not like I mean, people who are taking things very seriously, for example, will not say Kaddish out loud without 10 men. They don't have that necessarily where they have to have, for their prayers, they can do them by themselves. I mean, we can do our prayers by ourselves too, but it's definitely encouraged. They encourage people to pray together. I think it's fair to say that there are, I never like to comment on, ask a Muslim for their, and they'd have to, also who you're talking to within the Islamic community, just like who you ask in the Jewish community. But a lot of people in the Orthodox, and not even Orthodox, real again, necessarily real observant Jewish community would say, if you don't have a minyan, you're not supposed to say Kaddish, right? So this is an issue for people during this time that's really, really hard, because I'll give you an example. I had a funeral recently that I did for a Persian Jewish community, a member of the Persian Jewish community, and they tend to be a little bit more, I would say, strict about having men only being a part of the minyan. And so here was the problem. Eden only allows 10 people at the graveside. So they said, how can we have 10 people? The guy who died had daughters, right? And they were granddaughters, but they were daughters that wanted to be at the graveside. And they said, look, you can't require us to only have 10 people, because then the daughters can't be there and we can't have a minyan to say Kaddish. Legitimate issue. So the cemetery's position was, our rule is that we cannot have more than 10 people at the graveside. And their point was, well, that's an arbitrary rule. As long as people are 6 feet apart, what does it matter? So it was almost a really big problem. In the end, I think they came up with a solution so that they allowed people, when they only had 10 people at a time, but they brought up, when it came time for Kaddish, they just had 10 men standing there for Kaddish, and the women stepped back, and they, I mean, it's not a problem for me because I count women as part of a minyan, but if you're following it that only men can be part of the minyan, it becomes a problem. So needless to say, everybody saw what happened in New York yesterday. So this is an issue for the Jewish community, having a minyan, and who gets to be part of a minyan, what family gets to be part of a service.
Yeah.
It's a real problem. I don't have a good answer for it, because I do believe in abiding by the laws. I'm not sure that the law as it's been laid down so far really prohibits more than 10 people being outside at a service. I'm not talking about what happened in New York. I'm talking about what happens at a service like a service I did today, where you could have definitely had more than 10 people standing a good 6 feet apart, and you could have had 40 or 50 people there, because it's, you know, it's a big area. I mean, it's unlimited almost. I mean, it's hard to be heard by too many, you know, by that many people if they're all spread out. But I would say, how could you not let family in? So yeah, it is an issue right now. And it's one that I'm thinking, unfortunately, very much about. So, so again, it says the priest who has been appointed, and again, this is assuming that this continues on after Aaron, who has been anointed and ordained to serve as priest in place of his father, shall make expiation. He shall put on the linen vestments, sacral vestments. He shall purge the innermost shrine. He shall purge the tent of meeting and the altar. And he shall make expiation for the priests and for all the people of the congregation. This shall be for you a law for all time, to make atonement for the Israelites. Lechaper, the word kippur, for their sins once a year. And Moses did as the Lord commanded. And again, that's usually the section that we read at our synagogue. But that is not the whole portion, folks. This is the portion that talks about what we do to cleanse the tabernacle and then later on the temple. But let's look at what happens next.
Because don't you have blood everywhere?
Well, you do bathe. You do bathe yourself. So the blood on you would assumedly come out when you wash yourself. But the blood that was left behind, yeah. Assumedly what you had in the on the altar and in the Holy of Holies is lots of drops of blood. So it is strange because it doesn't seem like it would be clean, but this is the weird thing about blood in Judaism. It's both purifying and takes away, makes something holy, and it also makes something impure. It has the power to do both. Again, I guess you could say, what's the intention for it, and how is it used? So, we're going to skip ahead a little bit more. I wanted to go a little bit further here. The chapter 17 really has to do with sacrifices. Hold it one second. I'm going to get up for one quick second. I'm going to close the door. There's too much noise downstairs. When we look at other sacrifices and how people are purifying things, the Torah portion also talks about what happens when people are not doing what they're supposed to be doing with the sacrifices. And so the laws are pretty strict, as you can imagine. If anyone of the house of Israel or the strangers who reside among them partakes of any blood, I will set my face against that person who partakes of the blood, and I will cut him off from his kin. For the life is in the blood, the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have assigned it to you for making expiation for your lives upon the altar. It is the blood is life that affects expiation. And again, it says nefesh habasar badam. The soul life is in the blood. And so that's why we're not supposed to eat blood in our meat. You know, this is why we salt our food, our meat, I should say our food, our meat in particular. And it's this idea that the life is in the blood, and that's why the blood makes expiation. That's why it has that power. Because it affects expiation. So it has a purpose. It's not supposed to be consumed. It's not supposed to be eaten. It's supposed to be used for purification. And it says, no person among you shall partake of blood, nor the stranger or who resides among you partake of blood. And if any Israelite or any stranger who resides among them hunts down an animal or a bird that may be eaten, he shall pour out its blood and cover it with earth. For the life of all flesh, its blood is its life. Therefore I say to the Israelite people, you shall not partake of the blood of any flesh, For the life of all flesh is its blood. Anyone who partakes of it shall be cut off. So pretty strict. Again, the next paragraph says, any person, whether citizen or stranger, who eats what has died or has been torn by beasts, shall wash his clothes, bathe in water, and remain unclean until evening. Then he shall be clean. This is the law of animals that are not kosher, not because they're not kosher animals, but because they weren't killed in a kosher way. And what do we call these animals? There's a word for them. It's right here.
Treif.
Yep. This is what the word treif really means. Torn.
Can I interject something here more?
Yes.
A couple of things that used to confuse me. Number one, clean. When they use clean in Torah, they don't mean clean like we normally mean clean. And pure, it means spiritual purity. It's a very mysterious, mystical thing. So, and the word holy, all that means is being separate, different. And if you go through the Torah, a very strong theme in Torah is that the Jewish people need to be different and separate. And that's what all these laws are doing. They're making us into a nation that's different than everybody else. And the priests are holy because they're different than the rest of the Israelite nation.
Yeah.
You know, and this whole ritual is a ritual that both elevates the priesthood, separates them from the people because they have the ability to decide what is pure and what isn't. Just the way they could decide what was pure in you know, the dermatological issues. It's the same dynamic going on here, but also we have a national ritual that unites us as a people every year by a communal expiation of sin.
Yes. And again, this is really from here on out back to this idea of maintaining that holiness, that cleanness. But again, it's not just
the difference, that spiritual purity.
It's not just not the priest, because what it says right here is chol nefesh, any person.
We're a nation of priests.
Yeah, and interestingly, you could make the argument also the Ezrach and the Ger. It's the citizen or the stranger. It's the people who live amongst you that also have to follow these rules. So it's not just the Israelites. It's not just the Jewish people. It's the people who live amongst us. So we'd say that, interestingly, today we translate the word ger as a convert, but that's not the original meaning of it. It means a stranger. It's somebody who is not an Israelite. And so the Torah is telling us that people who live amongst us are also obligated to follow these rules. So these rules are not just for the priests. And people say, well, Leviticus is about the priests. Well, it is, but it says several times that these laws are for other people. And it's not just the other people. It's any person that lives amongst you has to follow these rules. But again, the word tameh and tahor, as Ronnie's saying, these are important words that don't really translate very well. Here they're translated as clean and unclean. Sometimes it's pure and impure. Sometimes, again, the word tahor seems to have a sense of holiness or a state of being holy. But clearly, what they're talking about here too is that tahor, being in that state of cleanliness or cleanness, has to be maintained. And it's not like the abnormal situation where you're holy when you're doing something special, when you're in the midst of prayer, where you're in the midst of sacrifice, that's when you're holy. No, you're holy like every day. Your ideal state is one of holiness. You don't enter holiness on Shabbos or on a holiday. You're in a state of being tahor all the time. Tameh is when you're not in that state, when you're not where you're supposed to be. So that's the interesting thing, is the default position is supposed to be being tahor. It's not like we're normally tameh, walking around tameh. which is why we had groups of Jews that really got obsessed with this. I mean, we know about the people who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, or at least the people who lived in the Qumran community. They were bathing themselves constantly. Every day they were going to the mikveh twice a day because they felt that this was really something that needed to be maintained constantly and was really important. It was something that, you know, people had to be part of all the time, not just when they were, you know, doing something special. So this made people, this I wouldn't say that made them crazy, but it could if you're constantly worried about not being in a state of tahor, however you want to translate that, pure, holy, clean. It can make you nuts. And I would say that there are people today who sometimes feel that way when it comes to Jewish ritual, that they really do want to stay in a constant state and are worried that they can maintain that state of tahara, that they're constantly in a pure state. So there is that tendency that you'll see within some streams of Jewish philosophy that we really have to work at this constantly. And like when thoughts get in our head that are impure, it's a problem. And so this doesn't go away. Let's put it that way. But it also can lead to, I've said this many times, Judaism is the best religion for people with OCD, because there's a constant, you can go into a constant stream of having to do certain things in order to, if you will, be in the right place. And if it sounds in some cases like what people with OCD do, it's because there are similarities in some of these repetitive actions and whether it psychologically manifests itself in religion or wherever it comes from. I don't want to speculate, but it does sound familiar for people who've dealt with this in their own lives. Now we're going to,
you know, Mark, that's exactly how we're all living right now. Repetitive cleanliness, repetitive washing. So people of faith may feel really comfortable with that. People with OCD may be very comfortable with what we're all doing now.
Well, there's no doubt about it. I have a little bit of the germophobia. You know, I'm not. You know, sometimes I think to myself, why do I always have hand sanitizer? I've said this before. I mean, this was on my desk before 2 months ago. This is always. I don't even know why I have it in my house. I mean, but I have it in my car. I always have it around. And it's weird because I don't think about
even before the crisis. Before the crisis.
Yeah, I don't think about it like I'm gonna get sick, but I do try to remind myself to do it. So I don't think it comes from a place of that. If I don't do it, I don't think I'm gonna get sick. I don't go that way, but I do think about it, and I have thought about it with today, for example, at this funeral I had in the morning. You know, everybody's distancing, everybody's had masks on when we weren't talking, when we were, anytime we were not talking, had the mask on, etc. We were doing what you're supposed to do. But again, of course, when it came down to the end where we were shoveling earth, every time that I've had a situation now since this started where we've gone to the shovel. So you always think you're supposed to put the shovel back and then let the next person shovel. That's a Jewish custom. But forget that. The fact that you're not supposed to just like having it sit for 1 second is not going to make it clean. So it's kind of weird that the one thing that they're allowing everybody to do, which is place earth, is probably one of the most susceptible places where we could be spreading disease. So here's what happened. So we shoveled the earth, and I always let everybody else do it. And I'll always take part in it, but I'll always let the family and friends go first. I'll go last. So I went last, and there was only 5 people. So it wasn't like there were dozens of people, but I still touched the shovel. There were 3 shovels. I didn't see exactly which shovel I got. I didn't say, oh, let's have the one shovel that only one person held, and I'm not going to hold it in the same place. There's no way I didn't try to do that. But I did think about, after I shoveled, what am I going to do with my hands? And so I thought to myself, well, if I take off my mask now, I haven't cleansed my hands. I haven't gone back to the car and gotten my hand sanitizer out. It was in my car, but it wasn't with me. So if I touch my mask, did I just bring from the shovel, did I just bring that to my mask? Well, 100% agree with you, Hal, that right now we're in a process of thinking about of contamination, which is what the rabbis are, the Torah talks about. The rabbis are very concerned with tameh, with impurities, how it's passed through vessels, because the Talmud goes through great discussions of, I'd say great discussions. They're kind of hurt your head sometimes, but discussions of vessels that can transmit impurity, ovens that can transmit impurity. The great discussion we have of the oven of Achrei, whether the oven is kosher or not, which causes a whole rift between Rabbi Eliezer and the other rabbis. One of the great stories of the Talmud. That's about an oven that's tameh, that's been rendered impure. Whether you're allowed to take off part of it and reconstruct the oven, or whether you have to just destroy the oven and start over. I mean, these discussions for the rabbis were super important, and ones that take up a good chunk of the Talmud. And we're in that right now. And we really, for us, we really do feel it's a matter of life and death. And our ancestors clearly felt that way too. It was an issue of spiritual holiness, and maybe at the root of it, there's also this feeling that if you don't know about bacteria and how you can prevent the spread of bacteria or viruses, that you use blood, you use whatever ritual you can to try to purify yourself. Now, with that said, now for something completely different, as they say on Monty Python. Well, maybe not completely different, but it is not what we've been reading before. Now we get to the part of the Torah portion that starts to get people either angry, well, let's put it this way. In the last couple of generations, as we've read this Torah portion, it has elicited responses in ways that our ancestors don't seem to have either foreseen or definitely didn't give us as much guidance for as we'd like to. Let me explain. Chapter 18. And let's really pay attention. Let's really pay attention to the way this portion begins before people start to get excited. Let's read the beginning. Keeping it all in mind, we will discuss this. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, so far that's pretty normal. Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, I, the Lord, am your God. Pretty normal still too. And here's another idea, which is pretty normal, but let's hold on to it. You shall not copy the practices of the land of Egypt, where you dwelt, or the land of Canaan, to which I'm taking you. You shall not follow their laws. Don't be like the Egyptians, and don't be like the Canaanites. Keep that in mind. That's the preamble. My rules alone shall you observe, and faithfully follow my laws. I, the Lord, am your God. Also, fairly standard practice. You shall keep my rules, my laws, my rules, by the pursuit of which man shall live. I am the Lord. You're supposed to live by them. Really important line. Maybe in some ways, the best line. Live by these rules, which, by the way, we could have an entire discussion just about that one line. You shall keep my laws, my rules, by the pursuit of which, by following them, you will live. Because some people have said this law helps us put into focus every other law that we have in the Torah, which is our laws are supposed to keep us alive. They're not laws that are supposed to hurt us. They're not laws that are supposed to hurt our lives, hurt our bodies, hurt our spirit. Our laws are supposed to be laws of life. So when we talk about what is the operating principle that allows us to violate laws of the Torah, it's that line, folks. That these laws are laws that you should live by. So when someone is wondering whether they should go to a hospital on Shabbat, we quote that line. That line.
Isn't it possible that by laws we mean mitzvot? You must follow mitzvot?
Yeah,
no,
well,
it's more than that.
The words that are used here are not mitzvot. They're actually chukotai ve'ed mishpatai, which are my laws and my rules. But one could extract from that, yes, that any mitzvah, but even these, again, laws that are commandments, that are laws that we don't even know why they exist. They simply, God told us these laws, which we usually call, those are the chukotai. Those are the laws, the commandments, here it's translated as the laws. These are laws that sometimes we say define rational explanation. We don't really know why we have them. Any of those laws, we don't have to keep them if they keep us from living. You shall live by them. So this is chai bahem. If you remember two words in Hebrew, chai bahem, live in them, live by them. That this is what we do. We live by these laws. They help us keep alive. They're not there to make God happy. They're not there to necessarily make us holy. They're there to keep us alive. And so we're allowed to violate almost any other law for the sake of life, to live by them. And so this is, again, I think, one of the great lines of this Torah portion and the great lines of all the Torah. But that's not what people talk about when they talk about this portion. So now we're going to get to the good part. It's not the good part, but it's the part that everybody gets excited about because it's about sex. Here we go.
Mark, excuse me. So I'm sorry, back to this. I'm just briefly reading a Chabad interpretation of this about the use of the word law and how can we be holy, and it goes right into mitzvot. It's not quite as severe as I'm hearing you say. I'm not troubled by it. I think it just is a lead into mitzvot.
Other than the fact that the word isn't used, but let's not get hung up on the fact the word mitzvah isn't used. The words mitzvah, mishpat, chok are all used. They're all different forms of, and they're used in different forms. The point isn't really what's the difference between a mitzvah and a law, a mishpat, because normally we use the word mitzvah. Normally we just say commandment. But however you're going to understand that, the laws that we have, the context of what we're about to read clearly is about things that are not necessarily what you and I would consider a mitzvah. And again, usually, we use the word mitzvah to be a good deed, a ritual, those kind of things. What we're going to read right now are rules that we would say that these are laws that, and again, we would agree with some of them. Some of them we might not agree with, by the way, but the point is that this isn't what you and I would understand the word mitzvah from. And let's keep in mind the context of what we're about to get, which is many of these things that we're about to see, these are not things that we should ever see. I mean, in an ideal situation, these are not things that we put ourselves into a situation where we even confront this. I mean, that's the context of what we're about to read. So again, I have nothing wrong with that. Chabad interpretation. I mean, that's a rational, logical, competent understanding of that line. But it's not the context here. And I will tell you that it's used in a broad way. And let's take a look at, again, what happens here, which is, it seems to be the context is, we just read, don't do what the Canaanites and the Egyptians did. Live by these rules. And if you don't, you're going to die. And that the option isn't really, well, you feel good when you do a mitzvah. You're following Jewish tradition if you do a mitzvah. If you break these rules, there seems to be this understanding that you're not going to live. It's a pretty strict context. So here, let's look at it. Gosh, I don't even like reading it, but I'm going to do it. Okay. None of you shall come near the flesh of his, none of you shall come near any one of his own flesh to uncover nakedness. I am the Lord. That's kind of like the general principle that we're about to now get specifics on. I could have just had with that you didn't have to go into the details, but we're going to. Here, your father's nakedness, that is the nakedness of your mother. You shall not uncover. She is your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness. Do not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is the nakedness of your father. Again, not just your mother, but your stepmother.
Wait a second.
Yeah, what's the problem?
And what seems to be the problem here is that when you are beyond what, because this is what they just said. Not that it's wrong, which it is, but that by doing that, you are violating your father's nakedness by being with the people that he's naked with. And so by being in that situation, even if you thought that it's not wrong to be with those people, this is why it's wrong. And the language that's used here is very reminiscent of what happens with Noah when his son, Ham, uncovers his nakedness. And Ham is cursed for it. So the Canaanites and the Egyptians, who are descendants of Ham, we hear right at the beginning. It's not a coincidence. In the Israelites, in the mind of our ancestors, those people engaged in practices which we felt were immoral, unethical, and downright disgusting. So keep that in mind. Think about the context. I want to stress here that the context is what's important here. And
Mark,
I want to congratulate Randy Martin for getting here just in the nick of time, because we're about to get into it right now.
Mark,
So,
I'm sorry. Isn't the underlying point of nakedness the story of Adam and Eve? That when she bit the apple, she saw that they were naked, and from that point on, everything about nakedness seems to be complicated.
well, it's an interesting point. You're right. So oftentimes there's also an issue that nakedness is synonymous with not being in the right kind of place. So you're right. The nakedness goes back even to that. And we just read about the priest covering himself and having his nakedness underneath his tunic also being covered. So yeah, nakedness is usually considered not necessarily the way you want to be. But there is this understanding that it's kind of our vulnerable selves. It is the most vulnerable we're at when we're alive, is being naked. And there's a recognition, of course, that we're born that way, right? Which we hear that in the Torah a few times, in the Bible a few times, that we come into the world naked. And so there's this recognition that This is kind of, in some sense, our purest selves, also our most vulnerable self. But there is definitely a sense that there's a part of us that when we're with the person that we care about in the world, that's the person we're supposed to be naked with and nobody else. And that when we see somebody's nakedness who we're not supposed to see, then it's on us. And by the way, that's one of the operating principles on why women are oftentimes covered, and men too, by the way. We forget that in the Orthodox world, it's not like, women have wigs on and we talk about that and we can watch Unorthodox and see how strict it is. Remember, the guys aren't usually going around with a whole lot of flesh and evil, right? I want to point that out. It's not like, it's just on women not to show their flesh. Men are not going around with cut off shirts either. So snoot, modesty is an operating principle here for us, which is, again, only the people that are holy to us, that are essentially our flesh, will see our flesh. Even our parents, even our family members, we're not supposed to see them in that state, in that nakedness. And again, it's a very strange thing, by the way. I will tell you, as a parent, and most of us have dealt with this as a parent, especially when you're dealing with a child of the opposite sex, there's a certain point where, again, you can bathe your daughter when she's 2 years old. You don't when she's, obviously at a certain age. And it is strange. It is a strange thing to think about, but you just know it. You just say, this isn't appropriate anymore, right? So keep that in mind. I mean, this is not a new thing, and Hal, you're absolutely right. This goes back to some extent to the beginning, but again, let's look at the context.
Mark, one other sidebar, if I may. Something I remember, I think my father told, maybe my mother. In the camps, they made the Jews disrobe because it was degrading, it was dehumanizing. But they would seek out those that seemed to be the leaders. They could tell who were the more religious. I mean, they're coming from the old world. They were all religious, but they could tell who were the more religious, and they would disrobe. Could have been a rabbi, could have just been somebody who was revered by the people. They would see that. They would study that, and they would disrobe that person and demean that person in front of that community, that crowd, that group of inmates, for that reason, because to be disrobed is dehumanizing, especially to do it to a leader, a rabbi, perhaps.
Yeah, and they did it. Yes, that was one of the. They show that. They try to reenact that and demonstrate that in film, movies, television shows, but it is very. It is hard. You're right to put into our sensibilities in a world where, again, you can go to the beach today and see people walking around pretty close to being unclothed, and understand that, we live in a society where being naked is not necessarily the same thing as it was in a religious Jewish setting. And so, this was another act of humiliation. You're absolutely right to remind us of that. And so the family members, we're continuing on with the nakedness of your sister, your father's daughter, or your mother's, whether born into the household or outside. Do not uncover their nakedness. So they're talking about sisters, siblings, brothers, also step brothers and sisters, and half brothers and sisters. That these are people who would also be people that you were not supposed to even see naked. The nakedness of your son's daughters or your daughter's daughter, grandchildren, do not uncover their nakedness, for their nakedness is yours. The nakedness of your father's wife's daughter, who is born into your father's household, she is your sister. Do not uncover her nakedness. Okay? Do not uncover the nakedness of your father's sister. She is your father's flesh. your aunt, right? Do not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister, which, by the way, is problematic to some extent because we know that
Jacob.
Jacob's cousin was
Jacob married sisters.
but then he marries the sister, right? So once he's married to the sister, he violates that law. He doesn't violate the law until he marries the woman, but as her cousin. But the other one that I was speaking of specifically that was an aunt was, according to tradition, Amram, Moses' father, married his aunt. Yocheved was his aunt. So again, maybe close in age, but still would have been a prohibited relationship.
I
Yeah.
gotta go, but I just wanted to point out, this is a society with a lot of exploitive sex.
What? Say that again?
Can't hear you.
This is a society with a lot of exploitive sex, where people in power can have sex with anybody and anything they wanted to. And all of these laws have the net impact of focusing the sex act on the family and keeping it sacred and disciplining that part of your life. And that's what all the laws, basically do. They discipline your everyday appetites so that you think about being holy all the time. And these laws made the family the center of the Jewish religion, essentially. So, as judgmental as we can be, especially when we get to the part about homosexuality.
Now you just ruined it. You just threw that out there.
But I gotta go.
I gotta go.
All
Ronnie,
right.
before you go, Ronnie.
Enjoy sex, everybody, and have a nice evening. And stay safe.
So if you're going to leave Phyllis there to deal with what you just threw out there. No, we definitely agree with you, Ronnie. The reality is that the Jewish people enacted these laws because they were not laws that needed to be followed by their general society. Their neighbors didn't follow these rules. The Canaanites and the Egyptians did not follow these rules. Not only did they not follow these rules, their leaders didn't follow these rules. We know that the Egyptians married, especially the pharaohs and the rulers, married their siblings. So that was the common practice.
Rabbi, if you jump down to the verse 16 regarding your brother's wife, don't we 16? Don't we read later on, or we've already read, where if your brother dies, that you're supposed to marry his wife?
Yeah.
So that's breaking the law right there.
No, so again, that is 100%. The law is very clear. Do not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife. So why do we have a rule that violates that rule? Because if your brother dies and he's now dead, and he didn't have children, the only reason that you have kids with her, the only reason why you have sex with her, is so that she can procreate and have a child. So the law actually, again, goes against another law. You're absolutely right. But it's based on this idea that if she doesn't have children, if she's not guaranteed children, which she wouldn't have been as a widow.
But also, Rabbi, I'm reading from the Tanakh that we have at synagogue. And in the very bottom, it says, a man and his wife are one flesh, even if he should die or divorce her.
Yep. And so again, this idea of him being dead now, the Torah basically said, the law of what we call levirate marriage, what you're referencing, is a law. And again, you could also make the argument, which I don't want to, that's a different tradition. It's a tradition that is not in Leviticus, the law of levirate marriage.
Right.
But if we assume that, and the rabbis knew that both of these laws existed, the reason that the law is there is simply to give that woman a child, and that child is that guy who died's child. It's not your child. She's not really your wife. You simply are a surrogate. You're a sperm donor for that man. And the idea, the logic being is you're the closest person that she could get to that. So you really don't get to enjoy the fruits of your labor. You're not really, I mean, literally, I think what the Torah is telling us with the Levirate marriage, which again seems to be really problematic at the face of it, there is this understanding that, you know, all things being equal, if they had the technology that we had today, that they would have said to the guy, no, you don't come anywhere near the woman. You don't look at her naked. You don't sleep in bed with her at all. You don't have sex. We're going to take your sperm and impregnate her. And if the Torah had said that, nobody would really, well, I don't say nobody, but you'd say, oh yeah, I can see that. I can see that the woman wanted to have a child with this man. He's now dead. And so we're going to give her the closest genetic material that we could. Now the reality is today, the man could actually bank his own sperm so they could have a child. And there are women who've had children with their husbands after they've died. So it is possible. And look, there are a lot of guys who went overseas to Iraq and Afghanistan who did that with the understanding that if they die, that they could have a child. So this is a real, you know, we would now say, well, it wouldn't have to be the brother who did this, but would it be? It's definitely not considered to be a situation of the guy is replacing her ex-husband or her deceased husband. It doesn't work usually very well, very nicely, I will just say. And by the way, you can ask Joe Biden about it because it happened in his own family. You know that, right? When his son died, when his son Bo died, the other son Hunter had a relationship with broke off his marriage and had a relationship with his brother's widow. So it does happen. I could say it's almost a natural. You can understand why it would happen, but it doesn't work out very well. It didn't work out well for them, and it very rarely does. It doesn't mean it never does, but the Torah is really warning against that kind of relationship and is not encouraging it for sure. But you're absolutely right, Mike, that there's an exception to that when there is no child, when the woman has had no child. So
in more contemporary times, that may have been the case with Bobby Kennedy and Jackie.
What do you mean?
No, there was some indication that after President Kennedy had been killed, that Robert Kennedy and Jackie, his sister-in-law, began a relationship.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Never heard of that.
I like that.
You could look it up. I'm not smart enough to make it up.
I'm going to look it up.
And whether it's truth or not, who knows? But they became close. Now he was taking care of her. She was a broken person, and he was taking care of her. He was the closest brother to take care of her, not Ted, but Bobby.
You're absolutely right. There's a book.
Yeah, but they never had a baby together.
No, I didn't say that.
Right, I know you did. Right.
Yeah.
No, this is.
And they didn't marry. Go ahead, Mark.
It's called Bobby and Jackie: A Love Story. It's a book that is not a fiction book. It's based on stuff that they. I mean, it was based on stuff that he had, I guess. So, anyways, do not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife. We just read. Do not uncover the nakedness of a woman and her daughter, nor shall you marry her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter and uncover her nakedness. They are kindred. It is a depravity. Do not marry a woman as a rival to her sister. This is the specific one about Jacob, and uncover her nakedness in the other's lifetime. So it seems to be maybe after one of them died that you could. Do not come near a woman during her period of uncleanness to uncover her nakedness. So this is the law of Nida, of not coming near a woman during her menstruation, which we talked about. We talked about it last week. I'd rather not talk about it anymore, quite frankly.
Come on.
I'm done with that. we did point out, by the way, and I will repeat for those who were not here, this encourages procreation because it basically puts it limits the sex act to the period where the woman has a higher probability of ovulation. Not a guarantee, but all things being equal, all statistics being normal, that's what happens. Do not have carnal relations with your neighbor's wife and defile yourself with her. That's kind of an interesting law because, again, that seems to be pretty limiting. Can't have relations with any of your neighbors' wives. But it seems to be, again, that there are certain friends or certain people that you'd have relations with that would, again, they're not relatives, but they're close enough in relation to you in your heart and with your relationship that it's not a recommended relationship. Now, here we go. This is where it gets, I wouldn't say complicated, but we're about to get into it, if you will. All right. Do not allow any of your offspring to be offered up to Molech, and do not profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Now that law right there is specifically about child sacrifice. Or again, not necessarily a child. A child of yours is not necessarily a little child, not necessarily a young kid, but any type of offering up your children to the god Molech, who is a Canaanite deity that would, according to what we know and what the Torah says and what we know from archaeological evidence, there were human sacrifices that were offered up for Molech. And now the next line, and again, context here is really, really important. Do not lie with a male as one lies with a woman. It is an abhorrence. It is a toeva. Do not have carnal relations with any beast and defile yourself thereby. And let no woman lend herself to a beast to mate with it. It is a perversion. Do not defile yourselves in any of those ways, for it is by such that the nations that I'm casting out before you defiled themselves. Thus the land became defiled, and I called it to account for its iniquity, and the land spewed out its inhabitants. But you must keep my laws and my rules, and you must not do any of those abhorrent things, neither citizen or stranger who resides among you, for all those are abhorrent things were done by the people who are in the land before you, and the land became defiled. And again, any of people who do such abhorrent things shall be cut off from their people. You shall keep my charge not to engage in any of the abhorrent practices that were carried on before you, and you shall not defile yourselves through them. I, the Lord, am your God. So that's the full context of that. Now, of course, everybody picks out the one line. This one here, right? Everybody's going to pick up on 1823. Or excuse me, 1822 and 1823 together. Those are back to back. But those two commandments, as you can see, come right after this long discussion about what types of people you're allowed to have sex with. And now we have the specific laws about bestiality and about homosexuality. Now let's say what we do see here for sure. Number one, it's speaking directly about men. So people have pointed out that this is about homosexuality for men. It doesn't say anything about women. Other people would say, again, just on the face of it, I'm not talking about how to interpret it. I'm talking about what it says. That it says it's a toeva. Now, a toeva, which is translated here as an abhorrence, is the same word that I pointed out just 2 weeks ago, is the same word that's used for eating unkosher meat. That those are also toeva. Those are also abhorrences. Now, again, in the context of this too, to read the whole thing, it says that these are the practices that the people before you have engaged in. And if you engage in them, you're going to be thrown out just like they were. These were clearly, again, practices that were associated with the Canaanites and the Egyptians. But there are no more Canaanites, and the Egyptians who are there today, who interestingly, as majority Arab and Muslim civilization, and even the Orthodox Christians that live there, I would say are not very accommodating to homosexuality. But the original Egyptians who lived there probably were. And again, even if it kind of varied by the civilization, in the mind of our ancestors, these were practices that Jews were not supposed to engage in. And specifically, by the way, even if these are not even if the Egyptians, and look, we have texts that say the ancient Egyptians also frowned on homosexuality, by the way, too. We're not sure if it was every dynasty, if it was every time, but the Canaanites clearly are the people who offered up to Molech, not the Egyptians. The Canaanites offered up to Molech, and they are also the people who were cast out of the nation, out of that land. They were the people who were in the land of Israel. And so by engaging in these practices, you're behaving like they are, and you'll wind up being thrown out like they are. Now, the homosexuality, the law of homosexuality, you read it. You saw it. It's in the context of, right before it, pagan offerings, not just pagan offerings, let's say child sacrifices to pagan gods, sacrifices of humans to pagan gods. And on the other side, bestiality. So clearly, there's a context to this, that these are things that these other people did. And now that you've seen this, now let's talk about how we can interpret this and how to understand it. Because again, there are many in the very most religious parts of the Orthodox world today who've also come to understand this, is that these laws, and specifically the law about homosexuality here, male homosexuality, in its context must be interpreted not as a loving relationship between two people of the same sex. That if you look at this on the face of it and the context, we have to understand that this isn't a law that there's not a whole bunch here that helps us understand what is going on here with anything beyond what it's talking about here. And maybe it's talking about it in the context of pagan rituals and pagan behaviors, which the Israelites have a problem with. We know that some of the rituals that the pagans engaged in were rituals where men would dress up as women and have sex with men as part of a cultic ritual. And that by itself might have been really specifically what this law is about. That in its origin, what we're really talking about here are temple cultic practices that the Canaanites engaged in, which were sometimes bestiality, sometimes sacrifice, and sometimes homosexual acts where the male priests would dress up as female deities, maybe fertility deities. I mean, we're kind of speculating here, but that they would dress up as female goddesses, and that men would have sex with them as part of the temple ritual to maybe have a fertility, kind of as a way of praying for fertility, offering up fertility, but that somehow this ritual is connected to the way Canaanite practices specifically was when it came to how these homosexual practices were done, which is why Orthodox Jews today can be more accepting of homosexuality by saying that we're talking about here is a specific type of homosexual act, which we don't understand, we don't do. It's the furthest thing from our understanding. Just like all the laws before it that had to do with incest are all laws in our country. We don't have to worry about following those rules because unlike the Canaanites and as we said, the Egyptians, for the most part, who regularly engaged in those laws. And so the Jews actually had to come out with laws against it because you're deviating from standard practice. So maybe these laws exist to protect Jews from engaging in pagan practices, which were kind of standard operating procedure. So just keep that in mind. As we're reading this, there does seem to be a context to this that is not just, well, we don't like gay people. And people who pull this out of context, including, again, unfortunately, to a large extent, fundamentalists and evangelical Christians in our country and in other countries, tend to completely miss the context of this. It's also strange that they're going to pick one law in Leviticus that they're going to follow. That this is the one law that they decide is going to be the law that they're going to draw a line in the sand in, because it's only here once. We all have another law. We'll get to another law next week in Kedoshim in chapter 20 that's similar to this. But this is the law that we have in the Torah that gets people all excited and they'll say, look, there's a biblical injunction against homosexuality.
But Mark, so we see the word abhorrence, the word perversion, but we don't see and cast out. So there seems to be an acceptance that you are not to do this, but if you do, you are not cast out.
Well, wait a second. It says right here, all those people who do any of those abhorrent things.
Oh, well, there it is.
Shall be cut off from their people.
Oh, there it is. Okay.
So there's a sense here that we have a communal responsibility not to allow that to happen. Now, and that's where when you say, well, what's it your business what I do in my bedroom? Well, people would say, yeah, but if I understand homosexuality being the most broad sense, your relationship with another man, this is where it comes from. It comes from this communal responsibility. And we would say in Judaism, yeah, we understand that. We do have a communal responsibility not to engage in practices that are abhorrent, that are going to destroy our society. Again, other people have pointed out that any of these types of acts, bestiality, homosexuality, or killing your children, also have all one thing in common. They destroy your ability to procreate, folks.
And they didn't have surrogacy or adoption back then.
No, they didn't. And so all three of those things have in common one thing. Well, they have two things, right? They have in common they're all Canaanite practices, but they also have another thing, which is they are essentially your willingness to be infertile. They are all, I mean, one of them is really clear. You're killing your kids. You're not going to have children and then kill them. Number two, if you have sex with another man, you're not going to have a kid. And number three, if you have sex with an animal, you're not going to have a kid. You're again getting back to what might be one of the biggest issues in this chapter. The way this chapter began, these are laws that you're supposed to live by. You cannot live by laws as a community, not just your own life. Again, I'm not talking about that you die if you do these things, but society doesn't move forward if you don't procreate. You can't live as a society unless you have children. And so you must engage in activities that help you procreate and that help you, again, have a living society. We live in a world today where one can make the argument we're not worried about, well, I would say we are worried about Jewish population, folks. It's not a secret that our people are always, the numbers are frightening when you look at them sometimes. I'm not worried about it because we've gotten through much more difficult times when people were murdering us and doing everything we can to reduce the population. It was pointed out yesterday as we celebrated Israel Independence Day that there's 9 million Jews now, or 9 million citizens or residents in Israel. But there are less Jews today than there were on the eve of World War II. So we're still not back in real terms to the number of Jews that existed in 1939. So this is the numbers game when it comes to the Jewish people. But again, one could make the argument that people have been forecasting our demise for a long time, and they've been wrong. So again, I would say that we have less of a concern with procreation, and people's decision not to procreate doesn't seem to be as weighing on us as it might have been when we were living in the desert 3,000 years ago, and procreation was a serious issue, not least of which is that women's infertility was not something that could be cured as it often is today. It's not always. There's some women who, again, despite lots of medical procedures and lots of money and lots of effort, still are not able to have children, but there are many who can. And so we have a lot of miracles, a lot of children walking around today that are miracles. And we didn't have that back then either. Well, we had God. We had God who, as we were reading in Genesis, helped Leah and Rachel have children, but we didn't have the medicine and the science that we have today. So one can also make the argument, not that our children are expendable, definitely shouldn't be engaging in child sacrifice, even though there are times when some of us would
Consider the option.
consider it as, I could see that. I can see that. There's a possibility, but your offer is interesting. How do I find this molech? And can I guarantee a return? What exactly is the return on this? But again, in all seriousness, these were rituals that, under our understanding, these are not ways to live, and these are not ways that encourage people's long life or society's long life. So it is something to think about. It is very relevant today. I don't know that I made an apology for this. It wasn't my goal. I wanted you to see what the text says. I wanted to give you the context for the text of this law that is often quoted, and I would say more often misunderstood. But this is the law as it exists. You've all read it now. Hopefully, if you've been here for the last couple of weeks, you see it in the context of Leviticus. And this idea of keeping ourselves holy, keeping ourselves pure. You can definitely understand why our ancestors felt that that this might be a challenge. And again, hopefully now you not only see the context within chapter 18, but also within the book of Leviticus. And you'll see what happens next week as we get into Kedoshim, which literally means holiness. How do we keep holy, and how do we stay holy? We're going to get into much more ethical laws, ones that kind of depart away from sacrifices, which we've done now. We've taken the first step away from the priesthood as we've looked at our sexual behavior. Next, we're going to get into our ethical behavior and the way that we treat other people. So Kedoshim has some of the most famous lines in the Torah, including Golden Rule, including our version of a wonderful law that will hopefully help keep us not just holy and alive, but make for a much better world than the one that we still have. So as we wrap up,
Rabbi, real quick question.
The sound of dogs. The dogs are ready to go. Yeah.
Charlie is
Question,
making
Rabbi.
a contribution.
Wasn't this week supposed to be Kedoshim also, along with the one we just went through? Isn't there a double portion this week?
You know something? I've been so into. You're absolutely right. Achrei Mot Kedoshim was this week, and more is next week. We're going to do. I did think about this about a week, or actually 2 weeks ago. So it shows you how much I've been thinking about all the other holidays too, like Yom Ha'atzmaut. That next week we are going to go into Kedoshim, into chapter 20, because I felt that the two issues that we're going to deal with today, which were the sacrifices and the purification of the temple, what we call the laws of Yom Kippur and the laws of sexuality, would take up the whole time. And guess what? I was 100% right. And as a matter of fact, I rushed through it because by the time we got to the sex part, we only had about 40 minutes to go. So I apologize if I didn't share enough about the, especially again, I do like when we get to this portion, talk about it. I will tell you that in Orthodox synagogues where they do read all of Achrei Mot, during Yom Kippur, you can imagine if you're a gay individual that comes to synagogue on Yom Kippur and has to hear those words, it's very difficult. It's one of the reasons why some Reform synagogues have stopped reading any of Achrei Mode at all. They will not read from Achrei Mode on Yom Kippur, not just because of that, but because also this idea of sacrifices and other things in it that seem a little outdated, even though it's talking exactly about what we do on Yom Kippur. But some Reform synagogues have read other sections from Leviticus on Yom Kippur and have felt that maybe there are more relevant sections for our modern sensibilities. But again, we don't read the part about homosexuality on Yom Kippur. We follow kind of what the Reform conservative tradition has been for a long time, which is just reading from chapter 16. I will say that one of the reasons too, I just want to finish with this, one of the reasons why traditionally we read this section at Yom Kippur was at Yom Kippur, and one of the reasons the rabbis say we read about the prohibited relationships was that Yom Kippur was a day that people would oftentimes meet their spouse. It was a dating day. It was a big dating scene on Yom Kippur. And this was a day that people would oftentimes find their marriage partners. And so the tradition, or the idea is that we have this portion to remind us not just of what our ancestors did on this day, but what we are supposed to be looking for, who we're allowed to marry, who we're allowed to engage in a relationship with on Yom Kippur. So on this day that we would be matching up. And by the way, it's not so far-fetched. Today we don't really consider Yom Kippur a day of romance. It definitely was in the Talmudic period still, but it also is interesting that it is a time when often people do see people, and there are many cases of people who, if they didn't necessarily start dating on Yom Kippur, they did see people maybe for the first time in many years, or maybe like somebody went away to college and came back and was with their family on Yom Kippur, and they didn't see, they family friends that would reconnect on the high holidays. So it's not so far-fetched. It does sometimes happen that people will meet prospective spouses at a time when everybody comes back to synagogue. So keep that in mind. For those who are single, I hope you don't look at our Yom Kippur as a time to date, but there is a tradition. There is a tradition for it. So who knows? Maybe we could get more people at Yom Kippur. Not that we need to get more people at Yom Kippur, but could get even more people at Yom Kippur if we turned it into the dating game. So with that, I want to wish everybody a healthy rest of the week. Yeah, sorry. Somebody wanted to say something before we go?
Well, I said I'd come to your services if you did that.
Diane, there she goes. Diane would come back. She'd move back from San Jose. She'd come back to LA, to the LA area if we had the dating game there. Well, I will tell you, I will tell you, I had a unfortunate service today, a funeral today. Guy was 92. He passed away, and he met somebody when he was in his 80s, and his wife, there was a second marriage for both. He was widowed, I think, in 2008, and he found a relationship and had a beautiful, again, I saw a beautiful relationship that he'd had for the last 10, 11 years with his wife. So it's definitely, Diane, never say never. And
how old was the wife? How old was she?
late 80s.
Really?
Late 80s. Yeah. So she was. They met at bridge. They were playing bridge, duplicate bridge club. So you never know. I'll tell you, it definitely seemed like, based on what her daughter said, he never had children, but her daughter said they couldn't keep their hands off each other. I found that to be so beautiful, and they seem like really lovely people. So again, you never know. Never say never. Anyways, stay healthy. I know it's hard to date under these circumstances, under social distancing, but you never know. You never know. Even if Yom Kippur can be, then maybe this. So again, we'll see everybody Friday. I promise we're going to have some Yom Ha'atzmaut melodies and songs for Israel on Friday night service. And again, stay with us for some other stuff coming up in the next week. But we'll be reading Kedoshim next week, and maybe a little bit of a more, depending on how much time we have. But stay healthy, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good night.